Hello folks, this is Isaac Misha. It's January 20th, 2021, which means it's Inauguration Day. Joe Biden was just inaugurated today after a highly contested election. A lot of people feel like this election was kind of like having a coin toss, and then the one person looks and says, "Tails, I win," and they never show you the coin. You would never concede to that kind of a coin toss. And there's a lot of people that feel like this election was just like that. That Joe Biden won in an amazing way in a few counties. He won overwhelmingly, giving him more votes than any candidate ever in history. He's the most popular candidate ever to run for the office. But he lost the most counties of any presidential candidate, any winning candidate. And he just won a few key counties by such a margin that it made him the most popular president ever. So that's just a hard thing to swallow when we aren't allowed to look at the ballots or the voting machines and whatnot. There was one audit done in Antrim County, Michigan, that showed significant problems. They're brushing off as human error, but I've read the report myself, and there was definitely some significant problems there. But I won't go into that because that's not what this video is about. I know a lot of people are feeling like they just want to see the coin, right? We want to see the ballots. We want to see the voting machines. We don't feel like we've been fairly treated. So I understand that. And there's a lot of us in that same boat, about 80 million of us. So, but right now I want to change directions. Well, on that note, I want to say, if we've lost the transparency in our elections, if both sides aren't allowed to examine the ballots and examine the equipment, then we've lost the republic. Because like Stalin said, he doesn't care who votes, it's who counts the votes that matter. And if we only allow Democrats to count the votes in Democrat counties and the Republicans don't get to look at it and examine the ballots and the equipment, then we've lost the republic. America is doomed, basically, if that's the way we're going to run elections. So we need to go to work hard in our states to fix that, if we can, especially in the swing states. So we got a lot of work to do here in Michigan. But I wanted to change the subject for a minute, for a while, and tell you about a dream that I had. And I had this dream back in 2014, 7 years ago. And it was such a significant dream that I got up in the middle of the night and I went and sat down and wrote the dream down so I wouldn't forget it, because I felt it was such a different dream, and I felt so strongly after waking up that I had to get up and write it down. So I have the written thing here. I know it's not interesting to watch somebody read, but the story tells quite a story. So if you'll indulge me for a few minutes, I'd like to tell you this story, and then you tell me if it relates to our situation today. And I'm not claiming that this is any prophetic dream or anything. I just want to tell you this story and see what you think about it. So I call it A Grizzly Tale. A Grizzly Tale by Isaac Misha. In the wee hours of the morning, during what are usually my most restful hours of sleep, I found myself carried off into a peaceful vision of an old cabin at a distance slightly to my left, and to the right across an open area was a matching barn. Both buildings were dark and paintless, worn hard by the weather. This place reminded me of my Uncle Lowell's hunting camp that I would occasionally visit as a young boy, though it was obvious that this old place had once been a working farm. The farmyard was now overgrown with tall grass, scrub brush, and thistles, and the old hand pump looked like it was rusted in place. A short distance behind the old farm was a thick, dark forest, and I wondered what it would have been like to live on a farm such as this so very long ago. I imagined that it would have taken an extreme amount of strength, courage, faith, and self-reliance to scratch out a living and raise a family in such a place. And I admired the fortitude of the people who must have lived there more than a century before. Can you imagine having a baby in the old west, or in the old Midwest back when we were settling this land. You're out 30 miles from the nearest town by horse and buggy, a day's ride out into the wilderness. It's just took some tough people back then. There was a slope running crossways between me and the old buildings. I was standing behind a small hedgerow of prickly brush. And as I scanned up the hill to my left, I was shocked to see a huge golden brown grizzly bear making its way down the slope on a course to pass broadside directly in front of me. I was stunned to see this because we don't have grizzly bears in this part of the world. This animal was amazing. I watched closely as it passed by. I marveled at the size and majesty of this powerful animal. It looked strong and invincible. I had never seen anything so impressive. Yet, strangely, I did not feel terribly afraid. I felt in awe more than anything. I had little reason to feel safe, as the only thing between me and this magnificent beast was a tiny hedge of prickly brush. But he seemed focused on heading down the hill and paid no attention to me at all. Once the bear was almost in front of me, he seemed to focus even more intently straight ahead and began to pick up pace as if heading down the hill with a purpose. I quickly scanned down the hill toward my right, though it was difficult to take my eyes off from this beast that was now so close to me. And just as he passed in front of me, he began to charge down the hill. Then I saw what had caught his attention. It was a second grizzly bear on its way up the hill. Then I looked just as Then I saw what had caught his attention. It was a second grizzly bear on its way up the hill. This one looked just as large and powerful as the first, if not larger. It was clear that these two were going to collide. The two met and hit each other as they both lifted the front of their torsos to gain leverage on the other. There were fierce snarls and swats of long claws. Their thick coats rippled with the force of the blows. The two hit each other repeatedly and nipped at each other, knocking each other back and then charging again. Then I noticed that the bites of the first bear seemed to be ineffective, as if it had no teeth. But the second bear was different. It was vicious and was out to do mortal damage to the other. The second bear was biting hard and tearing small bits of flesh from the first bear, puncturing his side, then extracting pieces of flesh from the top of the other bear's head. Finally, as the first bear rose up to make a charge, the second bear sunk his teeth deep into the leg of the first bear and ripped out a piece of flesh the size of an Easter ham. The first bear fell backward and writhed in pain. The second attacked the soft belly of the first and ripped his stomach wide open from his chest to his groin, totally incapacitating the once invincible bear. The second bear had clearly and violently won this match, but then the scene gets even more graphic. The victorious bear then crouched over his now helpless opponent, reached into the gaping wound, and tore off another piece of meat with his teeth. He sat back and began to eat it. The wounded bear roared out in agony as his flesh was torn away. He was now lying on his side, twitching in pain. His internal organs were in my view, with the other bear sitting upright on his rear end, near the hindquarters of the wounded bear. Before he had fully swallowed his prize, he began to paw at the wounded bear, looking for another tasty piece of meat to tear away. The wounded bear could only whimper in agony and weakly swat his paws at the beast, which was now eating him alive. The beast pays him no mind, as his swats are not even worthy of the victor's attention. He is oblivious to the distress of the wounded bear, as if he were walking down the grocery aisle at the supermarket, completely unaware of the other shoppers in the store, as he continues to rip one piece of meat after another from the wounded bear, chewing and swallowing each piece and then going back for more. The wounded bear was crying out in agony, and I wanted to kill it to put it out of its pain. I had never seen anything so cruel in my life. I was horrified. The bear, which had clearly won the fight, seemed to be so self-absorbed and completely oblivious to everything around him that it was unnatural. It felt evil. I thought that if I had my gun with me, I would shoot it, but as I imagined putting the crosshairs on this monster, I realized that a shot from my small caliber rifle would only irritate him, and I would be overtaken by the beast and eaten in the same way. I cowered behind the hedge, not knowing what to do. I was too close to try to run. I could not help the wounded bear as he was being eaten, and I could not defeat the beast with the weapons that I had. All I could do was watch from behind the hedge. This is when I awoke. It was about 4 a.m. I was disturbed over the grotesque images I had just witnessed, and I was filled with an overwhelming sense of helplessness. I thought about this for a while and then began to pray and ask the Lord to show me the meaning of the dream, if there were, in fact, any meaning to it. This was not a typical dream for me, but perhaps it is a fitting analogy of where we are today and what is to come. Here's my interpretation of the dream. First, let's consider the old farm. The old farm is a symbol of America's rich past, a symbol of the pioneer spirit that faced down the wilderness and took a living from it, a symbol of the strength, courage, faith, and perseverance of our forefathers who turned raw wilderness into the strongest, most magnificent nation the earth has ever seen. The strength and majesty of this great nation is embodied in the form of the first bear. The first bear was the strongest, most magnificent animal that I had ever seen. It was close to me, and yet I did not fear it. It was powerful and could easily destroy me, yet its focus was not to do so. Therefore, I did not fear it. I had no fear of it. The first bear, however, was on a downward trek. It was heading downhill, and as it passed me, its downward descent accelerated until it ran into another great beast, a more powerful and far more vicious beast, equal or even greater in size than itself. The first bear had no fear. I'm sure nothing had ever been able to seriously challenge it before, but it entered the fight as if it had no teeth, as if it had to uphold certain standards of conduct appropriate for bears who want to claim territory, not knowing that its opponent was not interested in a pushing match for territory, but rather sought the total annihilation of the first bear. The first bear was playing by the rules. The second bear didn't seem to matter. The first bear, I believe, is the great American culture of the past. It was a culture built on individual liberty, personal property rights, faith in God, self-reliance, hard work, and perseverance. This great nation brought food, opportunity, and hopes of liberty and justice to all the people of the earth. It was magnificent and strong, and there was no other like it. Though this first bear was extremely powerful, and you wouldn't want to cross it, it posed little threat to any one individual like me, because its focus was on the preservation of liberty, the pursuit of justice, and the rule of law. But the first bear was in a state of decline, descending down the hill and accelerating as it passed by me. I was born in the 1960s. This coincides with the beginning of President Johnson's Great Society, which undermines all of those values that made America so great in the first place. The decline of the American society has measurably accelerated since that time, as evidenced by an explosion in the crime rate, teen pregnancy, single-parent homes, abortions, and murder, all since 1963, the year that I was born. Unlike the first bear, which was in decline, the second bear was on the rise. The second bear was also fearless, but this bear was very different. It was evil. It was intent on winning this battle at all cost, and once the victory was at hand, it would not accept surrender. Its goal was not to win territory, nor simply to torture the other bear. Its goal was to take from the great bear on the hill all that it had. Even after the victory was won, the second bear was not satisfied. It just looked over its fallen opponent to see what could be taken from it. There was no concern or remorse over the agony of the first bear. As I replayed the gruesome vision in my mind, I could see that the sharp teeth of the great beast represented the leftist, socialist media establishment that is constantly taking bites out of America's rich history and traditions. They tear away at America's Christian roots and individual liberty, and they mock faith and vilify hard work and success. These are the very tendons and sinew that made America the magnificent nation it had become. The claws of the beast represent the countless bureaucracies and administrative agencies of the victorious beast, which continue to paw away at the remains of this once great society as the insatiable beast feeds upon its flesh, careful to leave the half-living remains somewhat intact as it is devoured alive. The victorious beast was motivated only by its own insatiable hunger, driven by want without concern for anyone or anything else. It was the me generation and its descendants, the beast that is hidden within the nature of every man, to some extent, now completely unfettered by any sense of decency and morality. My small caliber rifle was impotent against such a beast. Its use would only anger the monster and draw its attention toward me. This represents the small arms that people keep in their homes. They were of no avail. My only protection was the hedgerow in front of me, which brings me to the Bible in the book of Job, chapter 1, verses 9 through 12, where Satan laments the fact that God had placed a hedge of protection around Job. I was powerless to defeat the beast, powerless to revive the former beast, which would have been my best hope, powerless to flee, but somehow safe to observe from nearby as long as I stayed behind the hedge. I was not given the privilege to see what would happen to me after the carcass of the first bear was completely devoured. Perhaps it is the case that I will not last long enough to see the absolute end of the first bear, but it was clear that the second beast would never be satisfied and would seek to devour everything in its path. Woe to those who are in the path of the beast to come. What is it? Could it be a socialist, communist, or Islamo-Nazi regime armed with all of the weapons and power of the first great bear? The great former America that once was? It is hard to say. All I know is that it is evil, insatiable, and merciless. Please don't get me wrong. I'm just an average guy that had a vivid dream, and I'm trying to make sense of it. In my mind, the dream is a fitting analogy of events that I know to be true from past to present. But in order for the analogy to remain true to the end, America's demise would have to accelerate from this day forward. That was back in 2014. Unfortunately, it kind of looks like that part has accelerated, but we have a ways to go yet. I pray that this is not the case. What happens from this day forward is yet to be seen. God says in 2 Chronicles 7:14, if my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then will I hear from heaven and will forgive their sin and will heal their land. Because of this scripture, I don't believe that our future is written in stone, but on the other hand, as I look about, I don't see a great revival sweeping the land either. I see the hungry bear just getting hungrier and more bold and vicious by the day. According to the dream, I will personally see all but the very end of the destruction of the first bear. And the process will be grotesque and excruciatingly painful. May God have mercy on his people. My prayer is that as you read this, you will repent and get right with God. Trim your lamps and prepare for famine. Flee from the cities into the countryside and decide now where you stand. The day of reckoning could soon be at hand. Of course, even if this was just a random dream, as it may have been, the day of reckoning will still be at hand in the near future for most of us. Most Americans will face their day of reckoning within the next 20 or 30 years, even if there's nothing to this dream. I was born at the end of the baby boom, and I would be 80 years old 30 years from now. My day of reckoning is not far off, even if the Lord does tarry. I'm trying to prepare for that day. Are you? Addendum. So I pondered some more after I had written that. That was August of 2014. And I came back, I don't know, a day or two later, and I wrote another little paragraph here. After writing this letter, I searched for the word hedge in the Bible and came across a chilling tale in Isaiah chapter 5, where God states that he has planted a vineyard with a hedge around it to protect it. But the vineyard has produced no good fruit. Therefore, at some point, he will lift the hedge from around the vineyard that it may be destroyed. Then he goes on to warn those people who build house upon house and field upon field until there's no room left, and yet they are alone. This is the cities, house upon house. And goes on to say that even if in the countryside where a person has 10 acres of land, it will not yield enough food to feed the people. Please check it out. After this dream, I get goosebumps as I read that chapter. Then a few more days passed, and I wrote one more little paragraph. First of all, this may have just been a dream like any other, perhaps more vivid, but no more meaningful. It is interesting to draw these parallels, but there's no telling what will happen in the future. What it did for me was to make me think about the end times and what a person, particularly a Christian, should do, and I believe I have the answer. And it is a good answer, dream or no dream. The message is, and always has been, come out and be a separate people. God has always wanted his people to stand out, to disavow the ways of the world, not to literally leave the world, but to give up on the desires of this world and stand for him. That is the answer. Flee the world, seek God, and your soul will always have the hedge of protection. As for your body, it is just your temporary home. Seek him, be willing to lay down your life at any time, and you will find eternal life. God bless. So that's the dream I had 7 years ago. And that was my comments made 7 years ago. Somehow it seems kind of applicable today. So I just wanted to get that note out for everybody. And let me know what you think about it, and we'll talk about it. I had kind of forgotten about it for a number of years, and then this last year or so, I said, I got to look that dream up. I know I had saved it, and fortunately I was able to find it. And now I've been able to share it with you. Thanks for listening. Share it with your friends. Bye now.